What happens when the thought leadership challenge is larger than any one team or even a whole organization can get their hands around? When you can't do it alone, you need to recruit others to help you. So, today, I sit down with three people to talk about the power of relationships and cross collaboration in the world of thought leadership. Here with me today, I have Jeanne de Cervens, who is the project director for the Business for Impact Aging Well Hub at the Georgetown University McDonough School of Business. Additionally, I have Brian Forbes, who is director of thought leadership and strategy at Transamerica. And returning to the podcast is Surya, managing director of thought leadership for retirement and personal wealth solutions at Bank of America. We're going to talk about actual collaboration on thought leadership projects, as well as broader context for thought leadership practitioners. I'm Bill Sherman, and this is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Ready? Let's begin. Welcome to the show, everyone. This is a bit of a special show in that we have three guests. Jeanne, welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit about where you sit in the world of thought leadership.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Bill, for this opportunity. I am project director at the Georgetown University's Aging Well Hub School, and Aging Well Hub sits within the School of Business at Georgetown. We focus on harnessing the power and creative thinking of multi-sectors on significant issues related to healthy and active aging. And really focus on financial and health security intersection and connected communities.
Thank you. Now, Brian, where do you sit when it comes to thought leadership?
Hey, Bill, thanks as well for having me on here. I'm the director of thought leadership with Transamerica. And what that means for us is we're looking at opportunities to better serve our customers and our clients. And that can be obviously our end customers, as we try to understand what type of challenges individuals are going to be facing now, next 5 years, and as much as we can project accurately down the road, and as well as the individuals that we wholesale through. So in the sense of financial advisors, brokers, plan sponsors that we work with, is trying to have a better understanding, again, of the different changes, shifts, the pressures, the opportunities, and the challenges that they're going to be faced.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brian. Now, Surya, you've been a guest on the show before. Welcome back. And I would love to recap for those who may not remember our conversation from last time. Where do you sit in the world of thought leadership for Bank of America?
Bill, it must have gone well the first time. You're having me back, so I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you again. So I'm with Bank of America, and I'm in the retirement business, and I lead the thought leadership efforts there. And much like Brian pointed out, we are very much focused on our customers' lives. And in our case, and I'm sure this is the case with Brian as well, we have both institutional clients, Bill, and individual clients. So some of the research that we do, some cater to the institutional side and some cater to the individual side. But in all cases, we are focused on topics like financial wellness. We're focused on topics like longevity and life stages. And so I'm very happy to bring all those kinds of investigations and insights to our conversation here today.
So this starts as a really good opening point. All three of you, in terms of thought leadership, have a passion around the financial security, financial well-being, longevity, but you're sitting in different chairs at different organizations. And it's not that just out of serendipity, the three of you are here today, but you've known each other. And where I want to take this conversation is about the cross-organizational side of thought leadership. So how do you tackle what I would describe, to borrow from Jim Collins, as the big, hairy, audacious goal, transforming the way that people think about financial security and financial stability is an ambitious project. One individual can't solve it. An single organization probably can't solve it. So let's talk about the cross collaboration. I know you've done work together in different ways. I want to start with the most recent project, which was the millennial study. So let's start there and let's use that as a springboard into collaboration.
I can kick it off. So At the Georgetown Aging Well Hub, we've worked with both Transamerica and Bank of America on various projects as sponsors, case studies, journey maps, calculators. And we're in the midst of the pandemic and talking about, okay, what are the attitudes of consumers, both in terms of how they feel about their employer, their workforce, financial security. We know they're moving back in with their parents, and really to help the organizations figure out how do you respond to these consumers, especially the younger consumers, millennials, who aren't so young anymore, and Gen Z, really learn more about what they're thinking now in terms of their attitudes towards finances, debt, myriad of things, and looking at where they are now. And so we talked to Bank of America and Transamerica, and both were really excited about having this look.
Okay, so that's a good foundation. There's a research study on millennials and how they're responding in terms of financial security to the pandemic. Someone's identified a research question and maybe a hypothesis or two there, but we've got to actually get the study funded and backed. I'd like to start with you, Brian, in terms of how did you and Transamerica get pulled into this project?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one thing I'll just say, and I think it's probably everyone understands this when they're talking about thought leadership, but especially for the work that we do in Surya as well. And that's where our paths have always crossed with the different research groups and institutions that we work with. And it's so important to us. We have a ton of our own research. We have our own data that we can look at, we can source, and we can, kind of, as you mentioned, kind of get some directional ideas and some hypotheses. But finding like Georgetown and others that can really help us put this together, do a lot of the work, frankly, but also, give us their expertise is so valuable to us when we talk about how it's received by, the individuals, the companies, the clients that we're working with. So in this case, how did we get involved with it? As Jeanne mentioned, we had kind of had an ongoing relationship, doing a lot of work around caregiving, which is another important initiative of ours, which is certainly a subtopic within that longevity discussion that's so fascinating. But for us, it was, as you can imagine, as COVID's going on, everyone's looking for what is the next thing, right? What is going on, and what can we learn from this moment in time? And again, it was always stretching on longer than anyone imagined. So there was a timeliness to it. Let's see what's happening, and let's see what some of the impacts are going to be. And so for us, it was really just having discussions around what we would like to learn, what we would like to see, identifying the younger generations as potentially being the most impacted by what was going on, and then trying to spin up what does that mean. And for us at Transamerica, we were very focused on the workplace. What does that mean to employees or participants in our vernacular? What does that mean to plan sponsors and advisors, employers on the other side? So that was a fascinating thing that we wanted to better understand. So as things began to unwind, how could we position advice, services, or insight to help them better serve their employees?
Great. Thank you, Brian. Now, Surya, from Bank of America's perspective, how did you get drawn into this project and B of A get drawn into the project?
Bill, the story I'm about to tell is a story that repeats itself. And I'm sure Jeanne and Brian will have their own stories shared with other studies too. So Brian and team held a caregiving conference. And Brian, you'll remember this. And had me as a guest speaker in one of the panels. So I was talking about our caregiving research. The entire conference was, Brian and team staging a caregiving conversation. And so you can imagine this was pre-pandemic. We were having a cup of coffee and we were chatting about, hey, how can we collaborate on an important topic like this? So that was one question. And then the very next coffee was with a representative from Georgetown, Aging Well Hub, who was attending the same conference. And we asked the same question. And so here we were in person over a cup of coffee, begin to percolate, as it were, what we could be doing going forward. And honestly, when we were doing that, the pandemic had not yet arrived. It was the winter before the pandemic arrived. And so we were getting our thoughts together, the pandemic hit, and we adjusted to say, aha, here's a place where we can deeply ask the question with the same population of young adults on multiple fronts. Brian talking about workplace, financial life journey, et cetera, on how they're experiencing the pandemic. So this is an example of how we take advantage of an opportunity of being together and collaborate proactively on new studies and new opportunities.
Wonderful. Now, I want to throw this to Brian and Jeanne simply because I know the two of you have had a connection and a professional working relationship before this study. So maybe the two of you could talk about that connection and how that served as a Kickstarter.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start it off, but Jan, I'll go back to you pretty quick. So Jeanne worked at Transamerica. I'll let you fill in the years, but what it was with our governmental affairs group. And so, I mean, Transamerica, obviously extremely large. Our parent company is Aegon. So we have a lot of different groups, a lot of different silos, a lot of different work going on, and like anyone. And so the challenge, I think, with anyone is trying to figure out how do you connect those? As I always try to say, how do you connect the pipes, right? Because there's so much going on. And a lot of times there's a lot of great information being poured in one end, and you're trying to figure out how can you get it to really absorb within other parts of your organization. And that's a challenge that I think all of us probably face and will continue to face for the foreseeable future. But we knew each other from that. And I think one of the anecdotes we shared is, as I'm looking at the great work that they're doing and some of the research that we've been doing, not just with this, but certainly research before, it's always trying to figure out, is this of interest? How can you use this? What does this mean when put into your environment? How are ways that you can position this for time and attention with folks, key stakeholders up on Capitol Hill or outside? And then for us, how do we, properly leverage and get credit for the work that's being done amongst our stakeholders, so they realize that we do have, as best we can, an ear to the ground or, a finger on the pulse, to use some, cliches of the marketplace.
Yeah, and I would just add to it, I agree with that. And when I was at Transamerica and headed public policy, my job was in part to look outside and see what was going on that affected how we looked at legislation and regulations, but also to bring that back and look at the Transamerica's perspective. What are we doing on these critical issues? What are other companies doing on these critical issues? Also working with our research folks to really figure out what is going on and how we can help our clients in these issues. And healthy and active aging, financial security, it's larger than any one company. It is in the area, I believe, of thought leadership, just like public policy and research. It is really a shared obligation to understand what's going on, coming around the corner. How can we respond? How can we help all of our customers deal with a lot of these huge, demographic changes, et cetera?
So all three of you work within larger institutions and organizations. Let's talk about the internal sort of domain and audience for thought leadership. How did this study spread and how was it used internally by each group? So you agreed to join forces. That's great. You answered some research questions, but at the end of the day, in my mind, thought leadership needs to be applied, put to use for the people who need to know the information that it can act on today, right? So how'd you put it to use? Surya, let's start with you.
Bill, absolutely happy to answer the question because we've been very busy with it. We are so attracted to the insights of the study that we have shared it widely, and I'll describe that. But I was wondering if there was another question that we could slip in as well, which is, why would we want to collaborate on a study like this? Why would Excel Hub do it on its own? Because it has access to the data. Why would Brian run the study on his own? Why would we want to collaborate? Because you could imagine many other circumstances where people are saying, hey, we're going to go on our own way because the study we can do on our own. So at least for me, the motivation was that the subject is so large that it's really a social good, that we want to get this message and this insight to the largest possible audience beyond Bank of America's reach, beyond Transamerica's reach, including Georgetown. That's a big reach to get this study out. So that's kind of one. Second, you can imagine one could slip into a solutions and product mode, right? But if you look at the work that we have done together, it stops short of that. It's pure thought leadership, it's pure insight, it's pure what's happening to this generation. And then, of course, as a subsequent ability and conversation, you could attach Transamerica solutions to it or Bank of America solutions to it. So it stops short of that, which allows us to collaborate. Because the moment you start talking about products and solutions, you start putting walls up. So we stop short. So those are two that appeal to me and our organization to allow us to collaborate.
Well, and you also answer a question there of how do you make that work, of where do you put that boundary, right? Because it would be easy to step on toes or have different teams look at this and say, oh, but why did you collaborate with them when you could have asked us for this information?
Correct.
I'd love to hear from Brian or Jeanne. What was the why from your side on collaboration?
Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump. I was going to say, Surya made some great points, and I wholeheartedly agree with that greater good standpoint. Now, I can tell you that when it comes to research, you're always going to have people within an organization and sometimes individuals that are just going to say, we want to own that. So if it's something worth doing, we should own it as much as possible, right? So it can truly be from us. We don't share it, because in some minds, a sharing is a dilution of the impact of it. But as Surya talked about, this subject is so large, and here we are in a global pandemic when it was happening. It seemed a little myopic to say, well, we want to own this little bit. It was just great work that needed to be done, and it needed to be done at speed. I think there's a relationship aspect I would add in there as well, right? I mean, we've already touched on, there's a personal relationship with, the three of us sitting here together. We've known each other through different instances. We've been a part of our different conferences. We'd asked Surya to speak. I think that was the second time we'd asked Surya to speak at one of our major symposiums. So there is that personal relationship. And as you continue to talk about these things, you start to see alignment and thought and purpose of what you're trying to accomplish. But then there's a business side, right? There's, as we started to push this out into our internal audiences, it never ceases to amaze me how folks will use it. And what I mean by that, there may be a small part of the business. Yes, they're driven by their numbers and what they're trying to accomplish. And they look at this and say, well, this is fantastic. I have some contacts or some associates over there, with Surya's company are going to say, I bet they didn't even know that we collaborate. I bet they didn't even know that we're working together. This is a great sign of our, that we can show this as a great example. Almost, I don't want to say good faith, but just show this, hey, we're doing this together here. Why don't we do these, this, and this together over here? So there's a lot of ways that this works for organizations when leveraged right. And for us, to answer an earlier question, Bill, we're still working on finding that perfect solution for how do we get this into the hand of so many different constituents or stakeholders within our. And I tell you, that's something a code I've not yet cracked.
Well, and it was a loaded question in the sense of it's a huge audience when you say, okay, we've got every millennial potentially in North America or the world. How do you reach them? There's not one single, W millennial radio that everybody tunes into, right? So how do you reach them with the information through the channels that they get information from and people that they trust? Jeanne, talk to me a little bit about Georgetown's perspective and collaborating with Bank of America and Transamerica.
Sure. Well, I've known both Brian and Surya for a number of years. Both the bank and Transamerica are really done such a tremendous job in looking at the customer and what are the customer needs and orienting all of their business to meeting the customer's needs. So it is, I think they both think alike in that respect, have different businesses, are also partners in business. So they're great sponsors to this study.
If you are enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about the podcast, please leave a 5-star review and share it with your friends. We are available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and all major platforms, as well as at leveragingthoughtleadership.com. I want to dwell on the importance of relationships and how essential they are for a thought leadership practitioner, especially as a head of thought leadership, curating good ideas within the organization and then looking beyond the organization. Using this case study and other times where you've collaborated together, where have you learned how to collaborate effectively? And what have you learned? So imagine we've got a colleague here that's looking to do more collaboration. What should they be looking for in opportunities? Go ahead, Brian.
That's a great question. I think that there's, from what I've seen in my time here, there's a lot of different ways that people can approach that, right? Just a small sampling of individuals. There's some that are, you see their names on a lot of different conferences when things were in a normal kind of flow. You see them at all the events, so there's a lot of getting out and, just kind of the classic relationship building and mingling in the right place, right? So just be where the individuals are. And that's a great way to start up networking and in relationships. I don't do as much of that. And so to me, it's been really picking with a lot of due diligence, the right relationships. And what I mean by that, again, I know that's subjective, but picking relationships that have a pretty broad reach and a broad network of their own that you can kind of immediately tap into. And that's been something that's been very effective for us is we always are kind of left with the punch above your weight kind of mantra. That served us well is, for me to get into those environments and get to know those people, and it becomes the second, third introduction down the line. But then I think, again, it always comes back to the individuals when you talk relationship. And I think what you have here, and you've heard it touched on several times, is there's folks here that think a lot alike, individuals that really have a passion for what they're doing and what their organizations are doing. And that's magnetic, right? And you find ways to work. I mean, with Georgetown, that came through somebody that, a relationship within our work, within our organization, that put me in touch with Jeanne's predecessor, and we talked regularly for a long time with really doing not a lot coming out of it. That then led to some work on caregiving, and then we did a calculator, as Jeanne had mentioned, and some other things, and then this kind of came about. And again, the last thing is we talked about at the speed that this kind of came about, right? As we're kind of trying to figure out what's going on in a pandemic. Without that background of these relationships in place, you probably wouldn't have gotten this done at the rate that we did. We were able to get on phone calls, hash out questions, get everything, done and through our relative, procurement, compliance, all those things. I think it happened pretty quick because we had done a lot of groundwork.
So, Surya, going back to your sequential cups of coffee, it sounds like you're keeping an eye out for connections, and I know you enjoy making connections. What are you looking for in these sort of partnerships and collaboration opportunities? What advice would you offer?
Yeah, there are two kinds of collaboration that I observe. The first is internal collaboration. So Transamerica is a huge organization with many divisions. Georgetown is a massive university with many divisions. Bank of America is a huge corporation. So, I live in the retirement business. So I could be cocooned saying, I'm going to do things retirement, right? Whereas I could spend a lot of effort to collaborate with other internal partners, which is an equal amount of work as much as external. So that's one point. The second point is external collaboration, which is, the example that we see here today, and many others that I kind of inculcate and cultivate. The motivation also should be, I think, a little bit of humility that we should carry, which is there are some subjects that if it's very financial, maybe we have a good shot at it. But if it's beyond financial, if it's psychological, if it's behavioral, if it's generational, if it is life stage, then we want to lean on expertise to bring better insight. So, for example, leaning on the aging well at Georgetown brings that insight. So having that humility, that open mind also helps, I think.
And you
Yeah.
touch on a beautiful point there in terms of thought leadership. I'll get to you in a moment, Jen. One of the things about this is the more you know of your subject, the more you can say, those things are not my areas of expertise. And you can appreciate those who are experts in that. So, Jeanne, from the Georgetown side,
Yeah,
collaboration.
it's all about, as Buster and Brian said, it's the continuing conversation. It's asking the questions, getting different perspectives. We know each other, so we have trust in each other. There's credibility based on the work that we all have done. And I agree, getting other industries at the table is also huge because look at things from different vantage points. If I did this on my own, could have tons of conversations in my head and do a lot of work, but it would be one-sided. So we need to get many different perspectives to the table, many different areas of expertise to really work on some of these major issues and drive innovation and solutions that are measurable and can be implemented.
Well, and you run the risk of if you only come from one perspective, you may be right, but also myopic.
Mm-hmm.
And that requires, to Surya's point, a huge amount of humility, where you could know everything in the world that needs to be known on one fraction of the problem, but you've only described the elephant's tail. Go ahead,
I
Brian.
was just going to say, to go a step further, you could be completely right and even have, to use your analogy, the entire elephant, but still people are going to look at you as an organization or an institution and say, well, okay, am I going to take everything that they say full stop, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or, that's where as we bring that analysis to the table, all of us, right? There's a halo effect. People want to see, well, who looked at this? Who else is working with this, right? And you kind of be able to give you a little bit of that kind of a bigger kind of offering to folks where they go, okay, so this isn't just coming from Transamerica. Okay, an outside institution, this makes a lot of sense. And I think that makes it much more, I don't want to use the word palatable, but I think that definitely helps you climb a wall with individuals that maybe say, I don't want to believe exactly what one group tells me.
So one of the things that stands out to me is not only the creation of thought leadership, but the distribution of thought leadership is highly dependent on relationships. Who do you know? And how can you use those relationships to help create influence and take ideas to scale? Or in this case of this study that we've been talking about, making something that people probably felt but didn't have data on, make that visible and quantified, right? And so where I find a lot of passion is seeing the moments of cross collaboration where people say, we can tackle a bigger problem together than we can individually. I'd like to turn to each of you with an opportunity for closing thoughts or recommendations on collaboration, connection. We've covered a lot of ground. Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, sure. My mind went a lot of places with that. I would say one of the things that I feel has benefited me is, and sometimes it strings you out a little bit far. Where I sit within our organization is an enterprise function. So we have two dominant sides of our house, our individual side and our workplace side. And so the work I do is to try to look to both sides of that. If there's things that can go across both, that's great. If it's something like this case is very focused on one part of our business, then that's okay as well. So with that, you try to be up to speed on a variety of topics, right? And sometimes there's a really neat idea, but the timing is not right. I'd say that's probably one of the biggest things, understanding the timing of situations. And sometimes you're just kind of waiting, or you've got a couple small pieces that maybe on their own, they're not enough to really put the resources and time behind it to push it out. But maybe if something else could come along and you kind of put it together, now you've got some momentum. Now you've got a bigger discussion or something to have. So I would say for me, it's having that kind of general, as much as I can, staying in touch with everything. And then when these things happen, is then being able to quickly reach out to, again, a research partner or someone like Surya or somewhere where you say, hey, look, here's an idea. Remember this. And if we put this and this together, now we might have something that's kind of unique and different, right? This gives us something that's kind of got a nice glow to it that we're excited about. And, internally that can take on many aspects, right? We've talked about there's people that are focused on product, as Surya mentioned, and that's fine. So there's things that sometimes you've got to understand, does it present an opportunity to discuss something around a topic? Again, we don't do thought leadership directly tied to a product. Or is there opportunities for us to talk about something that maybe you didn't think that a lot of financial advisors are talking about now, but it's definitely something that should be and will be on their plate in the next coming years.
Wonderful. Jeanne, what's going through your head around collaboration relationships as we begin to wrap up?
I think it's just getting a myriad of viewpoints and perspectives at the table, credible people around the table. And because in driving any solutions, not one answer is going to work for everyone. So you really need to have everyone at the table to have something that's workable and coming to the table with questions, not answers.
And Surya?
Up to this point, we've talked about collaborating to create content, but there's also are you fulfilling on the mission? Are you taking this out to your constituents? And in various combinations, the three of us have done so. So, for example, Brian and I supported Jeanne doing a blog post at the Wharton Business School's Secure Retirement blog post, which was very well received. We have done industry conferences where we presented the insights of this together, fairly premium industries that attract a lot of senior stakeholders. Internally, to our own associate networks, to our own clients, we have taken this out. So this study has been so timely and so insightful that it kind of delivered itself. We just had to find the doors, open the doors, and off it went, because as young adult populations are coming into the workforce, senior executives want to know what's on this young adult population's minds. What kind of benefits should they be offering? What kind of career pathways? So it's been very timely and very well received. I'm delighted to say.
And as we close, my thought would be, it becomes obvious to me, and you've emphasized it, but I want to underline it here. The relationships that you need as a thought leadership practitioner are ones that you need to build in advance of when the time you want to deploy them. It is very hard to move at speed if you don't have those relationships in place. And so look for people who are interested in similar topics as you. And instead of looking at them as competitors, look to see where you can collaborate, see where their interests align with yours. I think we need to leave it there for today. Jeanne, Brian, Surya, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
If you're interested in organizational thought leadership, then I invite you to subscribe to the OrgTL newsletter. Each month, we talk about the people who create, curate, and deploy thought leadership on behalf of their organizations. Go to the website orgtl.com and choose Join Our Newsletter. I'll leave a link to the website as well as my LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to hearing what you thought of the show.